Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedlie, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Kate Stoessel. She's here to celebrate her YA title, Elements of Power. Before we invite Kate in to celebrate her great book, I would love to invite you to check out my first picture book. It's called The Great Maratini, and it tells the story of an aspiring and many would say clumsy magician named Sam. Well, that's his name. He's known all over the land as The Great Maratini, and he makes lots of mistakes on stage, and that's really funny. The great thing is he never gives up on himself, and he learns how to perform amazing transformations on stage. But on a journey from one stage to another with no crowds around to applaud, Sam learns that the greatest transformation of all is transforming feelings of caring into action to help another human being. The Great Maratini is Story Monsters approved. It is available to read for free on your Kindle at Kindle Unlimited. Check it out today, The Great Maratini by Jedlie. Joining us right now from Atlanta in Georgia, our guest is here to celebrate the release of her beautiful YA book, Elements of Power. Please welcome to the show, Kate Stoessel. Kate, welcome to the Reading with Your Kids podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited
to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. We don't have a lot of YA authors on the show, and I think it's probably because they see the title of the show, Reading with Your Kids, and they think, oh, this podcast is just about the picture books you read with your kids snuggled up on the couch. And yeah, it's about that, but we really are encouraging our families to read with their kids of all ages, because there are so many studies that show the benefits of reading aloud and co-reading with our older kids. It's such a wonderful way to continue that bond that started when your kids were babies sitting on your lap.
Absolutely. And I think with YA in particular, there's so many mature themes that kids are just being introduced to, that if you can have a little book club with your older child and read these books together, it can lead to some of those conversations that we want to have but don't know how to start.
Yeah, I want to get back to that and really dive into it. But first, let's find out about Elements of Power.
Yeah, so Elements of Power is the first book in a planned 4-book series. Essentially, at its heart, it is about a girl who goes to college and she's confronted with people who exist outside her worldview, right? And that being said, that's a very relatable experience for most of us when we go away and we meet people who see the world differently and have different perspectives. In addition to that, she's a witch, and the school that she's going to is a secret institution for people who have powers outside the norm in this witching society that exists in our world. So it's a paranormal YA, and it's really about found family and kids learning who they are when they meet people who are different from them.
Wow. What is it about this age that is so attracted to the paranormal and gothic themes and horror?
You know, I think that's a great question. And I was talking about this on my blog recently, that I think fantasy is not necessarily, we think of it just as an escape, but it's really a way for us to look at issues outside of the context of ourselves, right? So we have all of our own biases and our own experiences. But when we dive into a fantasy world that's so detached from us, we can kind of look at these issues that we face every day in a more unbiased way, and then bring those things back. So we think we're looking through a window, but really it's a mirror. And I think that resonates with kids in the high school, middle years age.
That's really fascinating. I guess it's right, you know, when we started talking about the fact that, having a book club with your kids is a great way to kind of talk about these themes that we may not have thought about before. You were mentioning in your book the witches and the paranormal. I'm imagining that one of those really difficult conversations for a lot of families to have revolves around faith and religion. Yeah. And it's like, wow, I don't know if I really want to think about and compare my Christian faith to a Jewish faith, to a Hindu, to a Muslim faith. But, it's really easy if we're looking at the witches and the warlocks, or the witches and the werewolves, or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point. And a lot of the book, because it does surround these different groups of supernatural who are in conflict. So there are witches and there are fae, and there are mermaids and etc. And that feels so outside of the realm. But when you really think of it, I'm asking the reader to look at cultural differences and how these different groups and the different ways that they carry themselves and their different beliefs jive in one world.
What would you say to somebody, and this just came into my head, but if there's somebody out there thinking, hey, this is a really important issue that we need to talk to kids about diversity and about empathy, and we need to get real about it. We don't have time to talk about this in the fantasy realm.
I've heard that, and I think it's an important point. All genres need to do better when it comes to issues of diversity and inclusion. Absolutely. I think that fantasy, because it kind of started as this like outcast outlier genre, right? Where you think a lot of people still think of like Dungeons and Dragons when you think about fantasy, has for a long time been including characters with different learning differences, right? Who come from different races. The LGBTQ plus, community has been represented in fantasy almost first, right? So there's a lot of inclusion that happens in the fantasy genre. And I think that we should always be asking those questions and pushing for more and to be more explicit in the conversations we're having. I agree with that.
Yeah. As you were speaking, I recall the first interracial kiss that was on television was on Star Trek.
Yeah.
So fantasy, science fiction, I guess they're breaking down, and they have been breaking down and starting these conversations for a long time.
And again, I think that goes back to this idea of when you're in a world that doesn't look like yours, is it easier to push those barriers there and have people kind of see it and experience it in that world outside of their own prejudices, and then bring that back into a more contemporary setting? I don't know. I hope that it's happening everywhere.
Yeah. Do you think folks are able to make that sort of leap? They're sitting down and they're watching the witches, or they're reading about the witches and the fays, and they're saying to themselves, dudes, you're not all that different. What in the world? There's this much difference between you, but you have all this in common. Are they able to close the book and then sit down and look at their own lives and say, oh yeah, I do have a lot more in common with those people I'm afraid of than I don't?
That's the hope. And I think especially when you write for a teenage audience, you don't want to hit them over the head with things, because kids are going to check out pretty quick if they feel like something is, quote unquote preachy, right? But you're hoping that as they're debating these characters, as they're diving in, as they're getting attached to these characters, that they're also looking in the mirror and bringing these things back to their own lives. So that's certainly the hope. And I know from, being a part of the YA community since I was in that age group, that the kind of conversations that happen around these worlds can get so intense and so deep. So I have to believe that they're happening.
Yeah. Let's go back to how we started and just talking about the transition from middle grade to YA. It is, you were talking about the themes, YA books, middle grade books are so much fun.
Yes.
But they're fun, and they're pretty tame. And I know a lot of adults who prefer reading middle grade books because of that, because they don't have any content that might be objectionable, or not objectionable so much as, I just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I think one of the big things to think about when we think about middle grades versus YA is just to break down what ages are they actually for? Like, what do the publishers say that they're for? So middle grades, you're looking for students who are 8 years old to 12 generally, and that's where the characters' ages are going to be in the book. And YA is interesting because the target demographic is 13 to 18, they say. Obviously, lots of adults read YA as well. But the characters in the books, it's going to be called a YA book if the main character is between the ages of 15 and 19, regardless of almost anything else. It's not necessarily a genre, right? So because of that, and because of the experiences of people who are 15 to 19, YA books run the gamut between pretty tame, right, aiming for that 13, 14, and 15 age, to what you would expect from many adult romance books, right? You're going to see more graphic violence, you're going to see more graphic romance, more profanity, and more mature themes. And so, I've been a teacher for over 10 years, and I've worked in the middle years range and also in 4-5 for a lot of that. And so kids start getting ready. They want a little romance in their books. They want some of these more mature themes. And families will come up and say, well, how do I know if my kid is ready for these books? Right? Mm-hmm. And you do need to be careful because in middle grades, like you said, the themes are going to be more friendship, acceptance, loyalty. But when you get into YA, we are going to be talking about romance, coming of age, worldview, parent relationships. So there's a couple of ways when I speak to families that I like to have them check if a book is right for their family. And the first one, like we talked about, is reading with the kids. Mm-hmm. Preview the book, have a book club with the kids, especially if it's about an issue that you want to have a conversation about. This is true of a lot of big ideas: suicide, violence, abuse. These come up in YA books, and sometimes we want to have the conversation and we don't know how to start. Mm-hmm. But we don't always have time to read or preview what our kids are reading ahead of them picking it up. So there's also plenty of places you can go on the internet, like Common Sense Media is a great website. And you can type in most book titles, and I do this as a teacher all the time. And they'll say, parents say this is for ages blah, 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 and kids say it's for ages blah, blah, blah. And then they'll actually have, like, here are some things you should watch out for from a content perspective. That's a great way to go. Goodreads reviews is another way you can kind of dive in and see what people are saying. And then, of course, just checking the age levels and grade levels on Amazon or other book sites is a good place to start when just deciding if something is right for your family in the YA genre.
You touched on something that I think is really important. In my career doing educational magic shows around the country, the first topic that schools were asking me to talk about was substance abuse and drugs. Yeah. And there were so many parents who were objecting. They didn't want their kids to hear the words. And, they didn't want, and my show was pretty tame. It was like, hey, we want you to say no because we love you and we don't want you to hurt yourself. But even that was like, no, I know my kid is in 6th grade. My kid isn't doing drugs right now. Great. Let's keep it that way. And the way to keep it that way is to talk about it. Right. You brought up the issue of suicide. I know that is an issue that is incredibly sensitive. And, I'm sure there's a lot of families out there who just like, if I don't talk about it, my kid will never think about it. But that's not the reality. Right.
And there's a lot of good literature. I mean, you have to remember, a lot of these shows that kids are so addicted to on Netflix come from YA novels, right? So there's a lot there that you can pull from and have a conversation because they're being exposed to these things whether we want them to or not. And I have that conversation with families a lot when they're saying, well, I don't want my kid exposed to this. And, in a very loving way, we have to say our kids are exposed to this. They are. They see it, whether it's on the news or in the shows that they watch or in movies. They're exposed to a lot of things that we'd rather maybe they weren't. Mm-hmm. But we can kind of take the bull by the horns, so to speak, and have the conversations with them so that we can steer their experience with these things so that when something comes up, they feel comfortable having those conversations with an adult who feels safe.
Yeah. And again, we've talked about this on the show a whole lot, sitting down, having those quote unquote difficult conversations with our kids. It's a lot easier when we have the conversation about a character in a book that's dealing with the situation, as opposed to sitting down and saying, Sally, Johnny, you know, what's going on in your life? That usually shuts things down. Whereas, you know, if you're talking about a character in a book that kids love, it's kids are anxious to talk about that. Oh, he made this terrible choice. Oh, she did this great thing. And you're not talking about them directly, but you are talking about the issue.
Absolutely. And as teachers, we do that all the time, right? So there's amazing middle grades literature. I'm teaching grades 4 and 5 right now. You know, we had a unit on immigration this year. So we read Esperanza Rising. And so the kids at the beginning of this year, like, they're hearing so much about immigration. And then we can take this wonderful book and kind of break it down. Like, what are reasons why people decide to leave a country? Like, what do you think of her decision? How is her life different? So we can kids are so overloaded. They get information from everywhere. Even if they're playing games, ads pop up, things pop up. And, you know, being able to sit with them and be present with a book and have conversations about the characters, you're absolutely right. You can have conversations that otherwise they probably don't want to have because they're feeling a little bit detached, much in the same way people have those conversations with fantasy because they're a little bit detached.
Yeah. And parents, your kids are being hit with lots of messages every single day. There was one study, and it's years old, so the number is probably higher right now. But the study showed that in any one day, kids are typically exposed to 3,000 messages in the media. Those are commercials on TV, songs that they're hearing, music, pop-up ads, billboards they see in the street. You know, just taking a drive to ballet class, they probably pass 24 billboards, signs on businesses, and those are all messages, and they're all going into your kid's mind, and they're all trying to grab your kid's attention.
No, and I was thinking too, you know, there are some things that we know right away we should be having conversations about, and there are other things that we don't know sometimes until something happens that we should be having conversations about. And especially when you're thinking about teenagers, think about the messages they constantly get about relationships, right? So why not pick up a book and have a conversation with them? Like, think about Twilight when Twilight was so big. Like, that's a great opportunity to have a conversation about, is this a healthy relationship? Like, what does a healthy relationship look like? There's so many opportunities, and it can be, you don't necessarily need to pick books just for having these conversations. Let your kids pick what they're interested in, read it with them, and then decide, where are my opportunities for, like, organic conversations here?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I remember one of the things when my son and daughter were teenagers, one of the things I heard from other parents was, oh, my kid doesn't talk to me about anything. I don't know what they're interested in. I have no idea. Well, this is a great way to sit down and find out what your kids are interested in. No, they're not going to tell you, Dad, I'm into this or I'm into that typically, you know. But if you ask, what are you reading? What are you reading for fun? Oh, fantasy, romance, you know, martial arts, whatever it is. And that's a great way to kind of peek into their world, that they're not readily to, you know, they're not going to be opening up the doors and say, come on backstage. It's like, oh, this is a way you get a secret backstage pass into their lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think too, you know, I know people I've worked with or other parents that still read to their kids every night. Their kids are going into high school. And it's so that they have just that committed time. It's a routine that they have, right? And as kids get older, it's harder. They have so many things on their plates. But reading, besides just being great for them and their brains and their development, it also is just a time where they can pause in their day. You know, it's the time where they can stop and think about things. I talk to my kids. We have Drop Everything and Read in my class every day. And we talk about it as almost like a mindful part of our day. It's our time when we can be quiet and just be with our imaginations and be with our books. And I think that as parents, especially as parents of older kids, you know, my son's 4, but I teach older kids, we need that too. We're taking them here. We're taking them there. We're worried about what's going on in our day. If we can pause and just have that dedicated time with our kids, where either we're reading together or we're both reading in the same genre and maybe we're trading books, think about how that's going to be as far as the memories that you make together as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So important. I love that. Boy, there's so much to talk about here. One of the things, as you were talking about, taking the time to pause, and you were mentioning earlier that, most of the things that your kids are loving on Netflix started life as a book. But reading a book and watching a Netflix series on the same topic with the same characters, it's so much different because you get to pick the pace at which you're reading. Sure, you can pause the Netflix and you can stop and go back and whatever, but it's still, the story is being delivered at the pace that the director is creating at. With a book, you can sit down and really savor every conversation and have a conversation about that and just close your eyes. And it is just a wonderful way for parents to spend time with their kids.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I talk to kids about reading as a job, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that I do all the time. And that feeling when you're like, was that, okay, this book is now a movie or a TV show. Is that how you pictured them in your mind? Mm-hmm. What were the differences? And these kids will light up and they'll tell you, no, this character is not at all how I thought they would be. And so you just need a little in, like just asking some open-ended questions will get you in. And then that conversation will flow. If they're really into this series or these books, that conversation's going to flow pretty quickly. And now, oh man, maybe I should pick this book up. What do you think? Or which one should I start with? And in my experience, kids get pretty excited about that. They want to share with you what they're passionate about.
Yeah. Boy, you just brought up something. I was a big fan of the Jack Reacher series. And I read all those books, and then they were coming out in the movies. And I'm thinking, great. And then I heard Tom Cruise was going to be the star. And I'm going, he's like my height. And Jack Reacher's like this monster, beats up the world. That wasn't what I expected. That wasn't what I envisioned.
And you know what? I think it's really important, too, because a lot of the conversation of fan casting and all of this are also opportunities to have conversation about our own biases. Mm. So recently there was a big controversy that came up on Bookstagram about they're making a movie out of A Court of Thorns and Roses, which started as a YA, but then they quickly realized was for 18 and older. And basically they were going to cast an actress. There was a rumor they were going to cast an actress. And then immediately people were like, she's too fat. Mm. And so this blew up, and kids, and this is a beautiful actress, right? Body positivity for all sizes. But she was nowhere near plus size. So then you think about all these girls who are watching this, who are not a size 4, a size 2. And they're looking at this actress who is in that range, is being called fat. So you have all these conversations that you can have about why do we picture the characters like we do? Mm-hmm. And then can we, just because we're online, say whatever we want about humans, mm-hmm. right? So I just think that in this world of being avid readers and getting so excited and having these fandoms, there's opportunities within the books. There's opportunities when things do get transferred to have conversations. And then, to actually ask our kids, well, why did you picture mm-hmm. so-and-so that way? That wasn't how I pictured them. Or, even where did you see the description from the author mm-hmm. that makes you think that she looks like that? Those conversations are great to have too.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're great because it's not judgmental. It's not preachy. It's mm-hmm. just, and we talk about when you're asking your kids when they're young, what do you think about this? It's empowering. Well, it's true when your kids are 15 to 16 years old, when you're asking them to think. And you're helping them open up their eyes to their biases, their prejudices. When they turn around to you and help you open up your eyes to your biases and prejudices, and you have those conversations, it really, it might be frightening for you, but it really is a way for you to grow closer and continue to grow closer with your kids and strengthen that bond that you have as family.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that the kids that we're raising right now, they're living in a time when they want to make the world better. They want to be activists. They see that as a very positive thing. They want to connect with characters in different ways, and they want their characters to also be activists and be wanting to make the world a better place. And so, they interact with flaws in a different way than we do. And I find that really interesting because I learn from my students all the time how they perceive a character versus how I perceive a character, or how they perceive something that they don't feel is right versus me, who grew up in a different time than them. There's just so much to be able to parse out and to talk about when you follow kids where they are and you're willing to kind of go there, right? And you're right. Having hard conversations is usually more uncomfortable for us than it is for them. But if we approach it in a way where we're uncomfortable, there's this scene that's a little bit graphic and I feel uncomfortable having that conversation with you, then they're not going to talk to us about it. And so I had a friend who said, I'm okay with my kids having like graphic romance scenes as long as they're healthy. And so I preview the books, and if it's healthy, then I'm fine with it. And that's the boundary that they know.
Yeah. So important. Hey, Kate, I know that folks are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about you, to find out more about Elements of Power and all the great books that you've created.
So my website is katestoessel.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at Kate_E_Stoessel, or on Twitter at Educate Museums.
Awesome. We've had a great time talking about a lot of things, but mainly talking about having those conversations with our kids around books and just continuing to create that bond as a family. Our guest is the author of Elements of Power, Kate Stoessel. Kate, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Jennifer Milius. Jennifer is a friend of the show. She'll be returning to celebrate her brand new book for adults. It's called You Know It's a Verb, right? She'll be here. We hope you'll be here too. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Kate Stoessel. Please be sure to check out Elements of Power. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Justina Thompson, Helen Frazier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.